Hi all.
Hi.
I know many of you here, but there are some of you I don't. My name is Jason Wood. I am the college archivist and the head of Discovery Services over in the Simmons College Library. Glad to see some of my colleagues and librarians and GISLIS, members of the GISLIS community here, so thank you all for coming today. Thanks to Jerry for the distance for inviting me here and allowing me this space, as well as the student groups that co-sponsored this, which were SCIRT, Simmons Chapter of the International Relations Roundtable, and the student chapter of our very own SAA, Society of American Archivists. So, thanks all. I'm here to talk about educating a library leaders, the title of my talk. Mary Elizabeth Wood went to China about 100 years ago. And then Jason Arthur Wood, no relation mind you, followed her a century later. So what I'm doing here is, it's kind of meta-textual, so brace yourselves for being even more random than I usually am, and that I'm going to try to embed the story of Mary Elizabeth Wood and the story of Jason Arthur Wood and how that all intersects into one big talk. So have fun. And interrupt at any point because I love interruptions and digressions, so here we go. I've been part of the Simmons community for 15 years now, I guess, since I first came to GISLIS as a student. And I started working in the college archives in 2001, the fall of 2001, with Claire Goodwin, the college archivist at the time. And at the time, we just closed the centennial of the college, so there was a lot of history that was circulating around. Certainly the archives was always a tremendous amount of history. But in particular, Claire was very fascinated and focused on prominent alums of the college. Folks who did remarkable things, growing out of John Simmons' vision of preparing women and some good men to pursue an independent livelihood. And among those prominent, notable alums was one Mary Elizabeth Wood. And Claire introduced me to her within my first probably year, I'm guessing. And it didn't mean much to me. And this was the photo that we had. We had a print of it in the archives, and all I knew at the time, all Claire knew at the time, was that in the center was Mary Elizabeth Wood. She was an Episcopalian missionary who, through a confluence of events, wound up in China and establishing the modern library system of China at the beginning of the 20th century. Okay, great story, right? We've got a bunch of notable alums who did international things. There was Henrietta Dermond, who was imprisoned in the Gulag for bringing librarianship to Stalinist, the Soviet Union. So Mary Elizabeth Wood wasn't alone in Simmons' international reach, but nonetheless she was a prominent alum. Like I said, knew very little about this photo. These were some of her students. I knew that Mary Elizabeth Wood founded the first library school in China, as well as the first the library system in China. So we have these pointillistic facts. So then, when we get to a certain point, we have researchers that come to the archives, and within the first couple of years here, this faculty member from China visited the archives by the name of Dr. Huanwen Chang, his name was. And he came and was a scholar of Mary Elizabeth Wood, was a faculty member at a library school in China, came to the United States and doing research and whatnot for some articles he was writing, and he helped identify many of these people in the photograph. So there, I now had more information about her. I had a vertical file assembled of information about Mary Elizabeth Wood. Fairly good story, right? This Professor Chen right there. So there we have the nut of the story is we have Mary Elizabeth Wood and we have Professor Chen. And therein they shall intersect. Mary Elizabeth Wood attended Simmons College for exactly 1 year, 1918 to 1919. And while here, she left very little footprint. You'll see her name is right here, Mary Elizabeth Wood. She was an unclassed student. She lived at Westland Avenue over in the Symphony area. She listed her home address as Wuchang, China. Okay, great. Then this is practically, because she was an unclassed student, because she was a unique circumstance, she wasn't pursuing a bachelor's degree. She came here just to get some advanced training in librarianship. We have very little else about her in terms of primary source documents about Mary Elizabeth Wood's time here. She doesn't appear in the yearbooks. We don't have her transcript. There you have it. That's the footprint that Mary Elizabeth Wood left here. oops, let's not jump that far yet. So let's jump ahead a little bit, okay? This is the beginning of 2000s. Let's fast forward to 2012 or 13, say. So we still have Professor Cheng sitting over in China, fascinated by Mary Elizabeth Wood, preparing papers, writing papers, publishing papers about her. Simultaneously to this, he has a close friend who is one of the directors at the National Library of China. Her name was Director Li. Lovely woman, I met her while I was in China. One night she had a dream about Mary Elizabeth Wood. Now everything begins with some apocryphal sort of dream. So she had this revelation that Mary Elizabeth Wood was a linchpin of Chinese library history. She's friends with Professor Cheng. They conspire, or they plot together. They plan together a way of promoting the legacy of Mary Elizabeth Wood. Director Li has a friend by the name of Miss Tang. I do not know anything about Miss Tang apart from the fact that her name was Miss Tang, and she was a financier of movie projects, of media projects in China. So the constellation is sort of expanding here, right? This is all. This whole talk is about coincidence. So we have an academic who's fascinated by Mary Elizabeth Wood. We have a librarian who had a dream about Mary Elizabeth Wood, and we have a financier who is willing to put up some money to promote Mary Elizabeth Wood's legacy. There. So now the stage is set for everything that comes later. In the process of all this, plans are established for a commemorative book about Mary Elizabeth Wood, financed by Miss Tang, an exhibition of material about Mary Elizabeth Wood to be shown at the National Library of China. And also a film project. They want to make a documentary about Mary Elizabeth Wood. Now this is a classic documentary in the fact that there are reenactments embedded within. So there's an actress that's going to play Mary Elizabeth Wood in the film. They're going around getting footage, trying to recreate the story, one of those very much of its time. You're very much embedded in the narrative. So in the process of this, Dr. Cheng, Professor Cheng, gets funding to develop this film, develop the script, develop sort of the staging for it. It all fits together perfectly, right? And many parts of Mary Elizabeth Wood's story touch upon areas of the United States. She attended Simmons College, for instance. She attended Pratt University in Brooklyn, New York. She also grew up in Batavia, New York, in upstate New York. Professor Cheng comes to the U.S. around 2013 or so to scope out some of these locales and locations for his film that is to come. Along the way, and this is just notable to a few of us in here, Professor Cheng, that's one of his film crew, and this here is Josie Fang, with some connection therein to the entire narrative. She's friends with Professor Cheng. It all fits together. There's 1,000 degrees of separation, which condensed to 1 degree of separation, I guess. As he goes around, Professor Cheng visits Batavia, New York, Mary Elizabeth Wood's hometown, also the location of her grave. Following the story so far? Mm-hmm. Then these people come into the narrative. You may say, who are these folks from Colgate University in beautiful Hamilton, New York? This is Suze and Ellis Rowland. They are retirees who live in Batavia, in Hamilton, New York. They are huge boosters of the Colgate women's volleyball team. This was a featured article in the newspaper for Colgate University. I put it up here because that sort of gives you a point of reference for Suze and Ellis. Suze had been through, she was, getting older and looking at some of, her family history, as many people do. She was interested in tracing down her genealogy and some of the people, her heritage, getting some of the backstory on her life. So in the process of doing this, she discovers that she is a descendant of Mary Elizabeth Wood. Cousin Lizzie is what they called her as she was growing up, but she, so the connection was never really made. She knew she went to China, established the library system, had some materials that Mary Elizabeth Wood sent back and forth, but beyond that, not much. As a good genealogist, she contacted a librarian, an archivist, some information professional. And in this case, she contacted the librarian for Batavia Memorial Library, the Richmond Memorial Library in Batavia, New York, who simultaneously had been contacted by Professor Cheng. So you're seeing all these narratives of time together all of a sudden. So the librarian put Professor Cheng and Susan Ellis in contact. When Professor Cheng visited upstate New York, he went and visited the Ellises and saw some of the materials that had been assembled of Cousin Lizzie's life. And at this point, the entire project for him metastasized into heretofore unseen opportunities. This is a copy of the biography that was prepared about, Professor Cheng prepared it largely about Miss Mary Elizabeth Wood. The typo is cute and quaint, so. So, in addition to all this, so the book is produced, and there's plans for there to be a conference, an aspect of the annual meeting of the National Librarian Association of China was going to dedicate a group of sessions to the legacy of Mary Elizabeth Wood in 2014 in commemoration of the 125th anniversary of the opening of when she became employed by the Richmond Public Library. Now that's extremely tangential. You would think there would be other sort of anniversaries they could, but you know, why not find any reason to celebrate? So here we have the 125th anniversary of Miss Mary Elizabeth Wood becoming a public librarian in Batavia, in Batavia, New York, tied to this. The research aspect, that's coming soon. 2014, the crew, the film crew, there's about 7 of them, I think, including Professor Cheng, come back to the States to do some videoing, to assemble sort of the footage for their production. Along the way, they interview me, and you remember I had but that one sheet of paper with Mary Elizabeth's name on it, okay? So they interviewed me, they interviewed Linda Watkins, one of the librarians, who worked closely with the library school, for her perspective on Mary Elizabeth Wood. They interviewed Dean Abels, who was relatively new at the time and had to sort of turn to Linda and me for some information about who Mary Elizabeth Wood was. So they're getting all this footage, right? And mind you, there's a financier in China backing all of this. Assemble a video. I was filmed. I did multiple takes of me taking a book down off the shelf, opening it up, and showing Mary Elizabeth Wood's name. I could reenact it now, but I don't have a book with me. You can imagine. Use your imagination, folks. So, as I said, there's going to be this conference with a session of panels on Mary Elizabeth Wood. Eileen was not able to go. Linda Watkins was not able to go. Professor Chen wanted someone from Simmons and/or Pratt University to represent Miss Wood's library education that informed her development of the library system in China. So in the hierarchy of things, they turn to me and say, Jason, would you like to go to China? I was like, oh gosh. This is around August, I believe. Was it August?
It was, walking back. I only asked me on the walk back.
It was August. And the conference was to be held in October.
Yeah.
I'm like, sure. No, why not? So this is one life lesson. I don't have a bucket list necessarily, but when something comes up, just add it to your bucket list so you can check it off. So sure, I say, sure, I'll go to China. So at this point, I begin the process of research. This is a photo I posted to my Instagram of beginning my research. You'll note that largely it is secondary sources, as I said, very little primary source documents about Mary Elizabeth Wood's time here. Largely articles written, many of them by Professor Chen, about Miss Wood's background, training, her experiences there. I also had with me the catalogs for the library program at Simmons. I spoke with the archivists at Pratt University and got copies of their material, so I was then able to sort of construct a sense of what Miss Wood would have studied while she was in school. But still, that's not a really great story, you know? So I had to find a hook to it, and find a narrative hook to this, right? So I'm looking at Miss Wood's career, being a public librarian, eventually going off, establishing a library, establishing a library school, getting training, professionalizing herself. I held this up and mapped it against the experience, the history of librarianship in general at the time, and tried to use her as an example of changes that were happening in the profession. Great, I said, I've got a hook. Wonderful. Conference is to be held on October 10th, I believe, 2014. They tell me to prepare a 20-minute talk, 20 to 30-minute talk. I'm like, great, I can do that. Do some research, prepare a PowerPoint. And we have it, and it all turns out to be this talk. Educating a Library Leader, Mary Elizabeth Wood at the Pratt Institute in Simmons College. My credentials, and presented at the annual conference of the Library Association of China. They're very indirect, I guess, about what the arrangements were. I had no idea where I was staying, who was meeting me at the airport. I basically had a passport, I had a visa to get into China, I had a talk to give. I didn't know where it was going to be given. I could have seen myself just arriving in the Beijing airport and having to, ask for a cab to wherever this was happening, and then just sit around and wait. But eventually I was found at the airport after about an hour of not being able to find me. I am remarkably tall, not particularly Chinese, so I would have stood out, but nonetheless I didn't. So I get there, and 2 days after I arrive, this is a 12-hour flight, exact opposite side of the world. If it's noon here, it's midnight there. I had no idea what time it was. Bleary-eyed, I go to the Chinese Library, National Library Conference. Now, I'm not a librarian by training. I'm an archivist, as mind you, I'm very much a librarian, but I've never been to a library conference. I've never been to ALA. I have no idea what it's like there. I know what SAA, Society of American Archivists, what their shows are like. Nothing like this. So I'm guessing that you librarians had a lovely and very exciting conference proceedings. There were flashing lights, swooping cameras, the whole 9 yards. I had a video here, but apparently I don't have the proper file format to work with a Mac computer, so my bad. Anyway, here we are, all set in the front row at the conference, because we are distinguished guests of the Minister of Culture, I believe, of the Communist Party. There we go. So we have Susan Ellis, we have Jason, and we have Lauren Cada. Lauren Cada is the archivist at the Episcopal Diocese, at the Episcopal Church, located in Austin, Texas. She was there to talk about Miss Wood's experience as an Episcopalian missionary. Yes, Emperor?
There are other people in there. Michael Darwin is the man who's facing with the smile from the American Library
This here?
Association. Yes.
He's from Cleveland, is that correct?
No, he's from Chicago.
Is he from Chicago?
Anybody from ALA?
Yeah, no, he is from, yes, I had dinner with him, and he told me some fascinating stories. He's a very gregarious fellow.
Yeah.
Yes. Some life lessons that I learned over dinner with him, but nonetheless. There we are, all eager to give the presentation.
Were there other Americans there?
Other Americans.
Chinese Americans, or just Chinese?
Largely it was just Chinese. There were some delegates from ALA there, but by and large it was of, by, and for Chinese librarians. And the 4 of us. The video, if you're really interested in showing, I can send you the clip. It's quite dynamic. This is a very bad photo I took of what the rest of the room looks like. Again, you don't get a full sense of it because it just goes on and expands wide, but there's a lot of people there, a lot of buzzing excitement. Notice the camera crews. Does this happen at ALA? I've never been. Are there camera crews?
The songs, I think it's very probably popular for songs in Asian library conferences, because in IFLA, when we were in South Africa, in South Korea, they developed a library song. So music in big events.
The staging for this was
Yes.
immaculate. They had award winners come out, and then they had the line up perfectly in queue, and then they had the deliverers, the folks who gave them the citations all come out in matching tracksuits to present them. It was truly eye-opening, especially for someone who was jet-lagged beyond belief. And there we are at the pre-conference luncheon that our sessions went on in the afternoon. I do not know who the woman in the middle is. I cannot remember. She might have been one of the head librarian from Singapore, but again, jet lag, business cards, the whole lot. And here's Jason presenting a slideshow and giving his talk. Remember I said it was 20 minutes, right? 20 to 30 minutes. I prepared a talk, ran through it several times, timed it at about 22 minutes. Like, great, I thought. Short and sweet. They didn't tell me that the 20 minutes was meant to incorporate both my reading the paper in English as well as my translator translating it into Chinese. They didn't tell anyone this, so there were multiple panelists delivering their papers in English, and everything took twice as long. So it's 1:30 in the afternoon when this gets started. It goes on until 6 o'clock.
Oh my gosh.
Whatever. There was a phrase I learned there called TIC, called "This is China," where you just kind of accept things as they go and move on. So we just accepted it and moved on. And at this point, you know, I would give a sort of a brief overview of what I covered in the talk. You know, if you're interested. Interested? Sure, why not? Also, I would like to say I produced 11 slides of images of Mary Elizabeth Wood, the Boone Library, Simmons College, Pratt, sort of as backdrops for the story. They went forward and took huge chunks of my text and incorporated it into the slideshow, which then blossomed into 41 slides. Lovely, right? Anyway, Mary Elizabeth Wood. She grew up in upstate New York. She was always a voracious reader. I mean, most librarians, I'm guessing, probably start out as, you know, passionate about books. She attended, you know, the small schools in Batavia, New York, and eventually, in 1889, she became appointed the first librarian at the Richmond Memorial Library in Batavia, age of 28. 1889, 2014, 125th anniversary. See? Commemorations, why not? 1899, Mary Elizabeth Wood was Episcopalian. Her brother Robert was a missionary in China, and she was very concerned about his well-being. She decided to take a brief trip to China to check in on him. As happens in many stories, Heart of Darkness, for instance, she went and visited and immediately became enveloped in the culture, and became very dedicated to promoting librarianship, education, to making sure that the Chinese had access to books. Now, mind you, this is through the mindset of an Episcopalian missionary, so she was especially interested in making sure they had access to good Christian books, but that was for Warren's talk, not mine. After she was there, she returned to the U.S. just a couple times, once to study Pratt, once to study in the U.S., to study at Simmons, other times to sort of present to Congress and whatnot, asking for money to support Chinese libraries. So my talk focuses on that. Oh, you can't see anything below it. It does focus on Pratt and Simmons. Now, in essence, I framed it as, you know, librarianship had gone from the bookman, the apprentice model that was so popular for so long, and it was sort of the way that librarians were developed and trained. And this is very akin to how Mary Elizabeth Wood started out. She was untrained in librarianship. She didn't have a college degree. She simply had a passion for books, a passion for educating, and she wanted to sort of expound upon that. Melville Dewey was leading the cause for library work in the late 1800s, established the ALA in 1876, and opened the School of Library Economy at Columbia in 1887. So all of a sudden we have we have educational programs that are training librarians to move into the career. I'm going to jump fairly quickly through some of these slides, but whoops. But that's the small town library that Mary Elizabeth Wood managed in upstate New York. While there, she worked closely with at the Boone Preparatory School and College, which was run by the Episcopalian missionaries. She taught them Chaucer, Shakespeare, English grammar, all the things you would, of course, need to know. And in 1902, she realized she wanted to make sure that they had access to books, so she opened essentially the first circulating library in China in 1902, which served the community of students at the Boone School, as well as other members of the local community. 4 or 5 years later, she came back to the U.S. to study at Pratt University for that 1 year, where she took some courses on librarianship. This is a photo of the Boone School Library as it was first starting out. If you're interested, I can give you some, background on Pratt Institute, but I shan't do that necessarily. I will give you some of the courses that would have been offered for her. Included in the program for library economy at Pratt were courses on alphabetizing, book numbers, cataloging, classification, both Dewey Decimal and expansive. Isn't that exciting, Andrew? Yes. Current periodicals, appraisal of fiction, binding and rebinding, accession work, maps and government, on and on and on. The work of a children's department, subject headings, shelf listing, things that we all learned today in SLIS, right? At the conclusion of the year, of training at the Pratt Institute, Mary Elizabeth Wood went back to China, where she opened the Boone Library, sort of continued to grow and expand it. She spoke at the 29th conference of the ALA and raised what is today equivalent of $2.7 million to fund libraries in China. She was nothing if not a very convincing speaker, I guess. $100,000 in 1907 was quite a pretty sum of cash. Some photos of the Pratt Institute. Again, 47 slides, right? All finished with her trip, she went back to China, shipped away her personal possessions that she collected while she was back home in upstate New York, and basically adopted China as her home country, declaring she feels she has a call to do this work and that it's part of God's plan for China. So there you have it. You can't really dispute that. You get a calling just like Director Lee's dream. So for the next 10 or so years, she continues to to train librarians on a localized basis. Samuel Sang and Thomas Hu were both trained by her, who went on to become very prominent librarians across China. But Mary Elizabeth Wood was nothing if not sharp, and she realized that if she wanted to actually expand the reach of libraries in China, what she had to do was sort of expand librarians. She needed more librarians to deploy to man these libraries across China. So she's gotten her idea, why don't I get a library school started? She'd seen what happened at Columbia, she attended Pratt, so there you have it. Why not develop a library school? But how do you go about establishing a library school? She decided to attend Simmons College. Why not? We all know the story of Simmons, don't we? Founded by John Simmons to prepare women with the skills to acquire an independent livelihood. The story of leadership in their professions, all of this is intrinsic to Simmons' DNA then and now. So she enrolled at Simmons College, and there's a vintage shot of the main college building. She was a special one-year student in a one-year program for college graduates to allow them to train for further exploration of library coursework. This is one of the old library classrooms. Not that much different from today, right? Look at the media that's available. Anyway, John Simmons, the library program at Simmons College was designed as being, quote, to prepare women for positions in public, private school, or college libraries, either as librarians or assistants in some special field. The program emphasized theories of library science advanced in class by lectures, discussions of collateral reading, and reports, later applied to definite problems, and finally, tested by practical experience in the college library and elsewhere. So there was an active internship program back then where library students would participate in the running of the college library. Just an interesting point of fact. Some of the courses that were required for completion of the degree that Miss Wood pursued. We have library cataloging with an emphasis on the assignment of subject headings, bibliography, government and serial publications, editing, proofreading, and printing. Library economy and classification, covering Dewey Decimal, expansive, and Library of Congress systems. Ordering, accessioning, shelf listing, binding, lending of books, federal, state, and municipal documents. Courses on the history of libraries, courses on library work with children, and finally, elementary and advanced reference, which address both 150 general reference books as well as specialized subject area reference sources and issues of specialized special libraries. So again, you can sort of take some of this and map it largely to Simmons' to the curriculum today. It's always interesting when you can do that. There was no courses on EAD though, Kathy, so that hadn't been developed yet. Now, if you're interested, and why not, let me read you some of the questions from a test from around the time that Mary Elizabeth Wood was here. Now, I'm a master of science, a master of library science at that. I couldn't answer any of these, so if any of you can, go right ahead. Describe the Dewey Decimal System of classification, both as a scheme of arrangement of knowledge and as a method of indicating such arrangement through special notation. No? Discuss the choice of subject headings for a small library catalog. How would they differ from the ones used for a large scholarly library? What guide or guides would you use in the choice of headings for each type? Yeah. Describe the contributions to international bibliography now being made by cooperative bibliographical institutes with headquarters respectively in London, Zurich, and Brussels. And finally, what are the relative disadvantages or disadvantages of classifying material by subject or of arranging it in the order in which it is acquired? You like that? Yes. Just put them up in the order that you said. Yes. Just some interesting points of fact about Mary's talk about Simmons there. So I sort of framed all of this by, she professionalized herself, and then she set about professionalizing library education. An eminent Simmons woman, an eminent scholar, very dedicated to advancing knowledge, and known and beloved as the queen of the modern library movement in China, a most fitting and deserving title. And then I said, thank you. And after that, then, and this is one of the interesting points that I'm just going to bring up, is there were 4 presenters of this. There was me and the archivist from the Episcopal Diocese, Susan Ellis. Suze talked about Cousin Lizzie, and finally the librarian from Batavia, New York, was sent her paper in. She couldn't make it to China that week. I don't know why. Maybe she had other plans. But so Lauren's talk was drawn from materials in the Episcopal Diocese, in the Episcopal Archives in Austin. And if I focus on library education, Lauren focused largely on what did missionary life mean to her. This was actually very eye-opening for me and sort of helped contextualize a lot of the drive, the fervor that she had to advance this knowledge. Just think what it is going to mean in China to put these books in the hands of the Chinese, the best books. Think of what a power it can be in helping to spread Christianity. That's how Miss Wood saw her calling. And then I apologize, these slides have been through so many different revisions of being modified in China on Chinese software and being modified here. But this is the talk that Suze gave about Cousin Lizzie. Just some random background. Fondly called Lizzie by her family, or Cousin Lizzie. She was actually named Mary Elizabeth. Why wasn't she called by her given name? You ask this to a room of 400 or so attendees, no one really raised their hand. It's a rhetorical question. My earliest memory of hearing Cousin Lizzie's name was when I was a very little girl. So she was taking it from very much a genealogist standpoint of family lore and legacy. Had a missionary cousin who worked in China. Her name was Cousin Lizzie. Again, they chopped up all of Suze's text and put it in here. But these are the papers. These are the personal papers that Suze had of Cousin Lizzie. Had been passed down from the women through the women in the family, matrilineal. And Suze had no daughters, so she didn't know what to do with them. Turns out that when she and Professor Cheng crossed paths in upstate New York, she showed these to him and decided that the most appropriate place for them would be at the National Library of China. Yeah. So this donation was going to be given to the National Library of China. And as I always say, collections go to the most appropriate, or should go to the most appropriate places, and who could think of a better place than the National Library of China for this? Also some gifts that Cousin Lizzie sent back from China to her family in the US, lacquered boxes, tapestries, whatnot. This is where it gets even weirder. Remember I said that there was a film crew that came here to film me showing them to make a documentary? So you have the history of Cousin Lizzie, the history of Mary Elizabeth Wood, and then you have Susan Ellis going to China to donate the materials to the National Library of China. So we've turned it from not only a documentary, also into a reality TV program. For the duration of my week in China, I was being followed around by film crews, documenting every single instance of everywhere we went, because not me, because I was merely an accessory. It was the story of Sue's going back and retracing Cousin Lizzie's footsteps. This was the press conference that we held, where Sue's presented the materials to an official ceremony. Supposed to get media coverage in China. I'm not sure if it ever actually did or not. But again, TIC, this is China, so we had, many of these were sort of students, so I'm not sure who was going to exactly run these fascinating articles. But I did a press conference. And as part of it, we also toured around some of the greater institutions of China. This is the Forbidden City, and you'll note here is the shark. That's the very own shark, which travels. This was a huge hit with all of my cohort from the US, thinking it the most clever idea to take with you the college mascot and pose it in random places. These photos went out on the library's Facebook and Twitter feeds, I believe. So if you want to, you should all be members of. You should all follow the library on Facebook and Twitter, and because you can see great stuff like this. We also went to the Great Wall of China, again, all being followed around by a film crew. And there's the four of us. And you'll see right here, oh, and you can't very well, but the film crew is all back there documenting our trip. So again, all becomes, it just gets more and more meta the more you think of it. So Lauren and I were basically props for the heartwarming story of Susan Ellis visiting China to donate these materials. I actually saw some of the film footage that was run at the conference, and it was remarkable. It was moving, it was heartwarming. It was Professor Chang visiting and crying at the grave of Mary Elizabeth Wood. I saw like a 10-minute clip. It's supposed to be blown up into a feature long, and I hope to get a copy. So that's sort of the essence of my trip to China and Mary Elizabeth Wood's trip to China, and some of the sort of the confluences of events. And then finally, this is the skyline of beautiful Beijing. They said it was supposed to be smoggy, and by gosh, it was. But they also took us around, largely because they wanted to get footage of Susan Ellis visiting some of the prominent cultural institutions of China. They took us to the National Museum of China, which was eye-opening for the level of Communist Party propaganda that they were presenting. And this was my favorite room. One of my favorite things I saw in all of China was the room of gifts given by other countries to the Chinese president, the prime minister, including the swans that Nixon gave back in 1972, I believe. At the same time, the pandas were given to the U.S. in that cultural exchange. Odd thing that I stumbled across. And we also went to the National Library of China, and it was a huge, vast. I mean, the amount of finances they put into developing these extremely modern facilities is truly eye-opening. It's come a long way since Miss Wood was there, and this is the reference area, the general reference area at the the National Library of China. 4 stories of and very, you go in there, it's very much like any public library with all of the positives and negatives of being in a public library setting, only transplanted to China. So again, it was very eye-opening to see sort of the comparisons and contrasts between American and Chinese libraries. And then finally the food. I was a guest there, and the Chinese are very proud of their food, and largely it was very good. We had a Peking duck one night there, which I'd never had before. Truly remarkable. I don't usually like duck, so I was quite thrilled to see that. This is a very minimal example of the feeding that they did. We had lunch and dinner every night as a group. So we would go and do a tour in the morning of some cultural institution, go to lunch around 2 o'clock for a large multi-course meal served on a lazy Susan that spun around. and it'd be done by around 3:30 or 4. Go back to the hotel room, and they would say, we're going to meet at 6 o'clock to go out to dinner. Mind you, I'm still jet lagged, so they're just forcing all this food onto me. If you don't eat it, you're considered rude. However, in the mornings, since I was jet lagged, I was up around 3 every morning, able to wander around. I discovered a wonderful McDonald's nearby with picture menus, so I was able to get a sort of egg McMuffin every day. And the hosts were lovely, but every now and then you do need to sort of escape from them. I mean, we're librarians, I'm an introvert, many of us probably are as well. There was no time to myself, so one night I snuck off and went, and I don't know if you can tell from this photograph, no you can't, so I found a bar in China that served absinthe. I mean, my gosh, legal absinthe, so whatever it takes. Anyway, a lovely time with the smog of Beijing there. Questions about Meredith Wood, about Jason Arthur Wood, our respective trips to China, sort of the framework of it, and some of the most interesting things was the way that the various talks, Lauren's, mine, and Susan's, sort of contributed to more of a complete understanding of Miss Wood and what she sought out to accomplish and did accomplish. And it just sort of reinforced, the power of primary source documents, the power of collaboration across institutions. When researchers come to the Simmons archives, I often wind up referring them to other places that would have collateral material, more additional supportive material. So this just reinforced kind of the web of knowledge that's out there, and it's the responsibility of researchers to piece it together and to, again, find the narrative that is the hook that your audience wants to hear. I hope some of this was a hook that you wanted to hear, but again, I'll gladly take your questions, comments, complaints.
Jason, you referred to Josephine Bang
Yes.
briefly. What was her relationship? Or
I
was
haven't
there any
the- I
relationship?
haven't the photo.
Oh, okay. She just was in the picture.
She was in the photograph. She was friends with Professor Cheng.
Okay, got it.
Professor Cheng couldn't remember her name. He was trying to describe her
But
to
you knew
me.
her or
It
something.
took a
Yeah.
long time for that. He also was friends with Professor Chen, Ching-Chi Chen,
Okay.
another faculty. So there was some connections, again, largest, probably through the IFLA community. Yeah.
They had the history of Mary Louise Wood, myself, Elizabeth Wood. We all have known her, and that actual photograph sits in P111 if you ever want to see the framing of that picture. But Josephine, Bob Stewart, one of the past deans, and Ching-Chi have all been back and forth to China, and so they've always, raised that connection
Right.
with her. But you're right, this was a fuller picture about her
Yes.
as a person
Yeah.
and her history.
Yes.
So aside from establishing the first library school, what actually did she do in China to modernize the library?
Well, I mean, just the fact that she actually put in place public libraries, public lending libraries. I mean, she raised, millions of dollars.
Yeah, do we have a sense of, like, a real sense of the impact that she had, or just what Dr. Chen thinks she,
Largely just, yes.
and what the dream was about?
Well, I mean, she is,
Like, it just seems like how much to do about it.
you would think so. But
Right.
no. After the end of my 7 days, I was, my God, there's so much about her. Everyone's just talking about her all the time. Having to regurgitate the same stories was exhausting. Because the narrative is a bit thin in places. Certainly the Simmons perspective is a thin narrative. We have her name written down, and we know that she took some courses here. She was very involved in raising money for the Boxer Rebellion in the 40s. Prominent in library circles, international library circles.
So is she well documented in kind of Chinese history?
There's
sources?
Linda Watkins assembled a collection of articles about Meredith Wood. There's probably about 30 or so citations, both in Chinese and the United States. So.
And I think the history of all the people she had an impact to have them go.
Yes.
That's why she's considered like the queen, because everyone's like, well, I was instructed by Mary Elizabeth Wood.
Certainly.
And that you pass that along, and as it spreads out to other institutions, that they begin to impact.
Yeah, it's very much the legacy approach of she training, again, Samuel Tsang and Hu. Similar to how many archivists in the area remember being trained by Megan Smith and Marinoff here in Gisela back in the 90s. So. It's the legacy aspect. Well, thank you.
And your tie is Chinese.
Oh, yes, that's right, yes, my time was given to me as a parting gift. The director, Miss Tang gave it to me, so lovely parting ceremony.